Hi, everybody. It's Miss O'Connell. So I am pre-recording the last part of our lecture because I have a funeral to go to tomorrow, and I will not be with you. If you see this before tomorrow, do log into Google Meet. Mrs. Reap, the librarian, will just take your attendance, and then you are free to go. But you do need to log in so she can mark you as here. So what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about the last part of our lecture 17. So if you remember, we had been talking about Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and so today we're going to talk about what happens after Thomas Jefferson serves his 2 terms. So we're going to have the election of 1808, and the election of 1808 is going to pit Democratic Republican James Madison up at the top there against Federalist Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. And James Madison, a little bit of background on him. He was known as the father of the Constitution. He had been a forefront with getting the Constitution written, and he is going to be victorious in 1808. So when Madison is elected, he will serve 2 terms as well. He's going to deal with some foreign policy issues. And one of those issues is going to be a resurfaced feud with Great Britain. So the War of 1812 is going to be caused by Britain, who decides that they're going to start interfering with neutral shipping. So the United States was trying to get shipping routes out. And remember, the U.S. had wanted to remain neutral. So Britain comes in and tries to take over and not allow us to ship. They're going to have the impressment of sailors. And if you remember, impressment just meant that they intercepted U.S. Troops, U.S. men, and they forced them to work on British ships, and provoking Indian attacks. So the United States is very unhappy with Great Britain at this time, and we are actually going to go to war. So the War of 1812 is largely a military disaster. There's going to be an invasion of Canada that fails. Washington, D.C. winds up being burned down to the ground. The British blockade the coast. And the only spot that is a bright spot is the war on the Great Lakes. Okay, so you have General Oliver Perry, and you have, some good outcomes that are happening around the Great Lakes, like Michigan, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, around there. Okay, so I have a little video on the War of 1812 that is going to explain things to you a little bit better. Maybe.
But by August of 1814, British troops entered Washington. The British set fire to the city, while Madison was in Maryland leading his troops.
It's his wife, of course, Dolly, who's home at the White House when the British come in to the city and start burning Washington. She rescues the portrait of George Washington and has the servants break the frame because it's bolted to the wall so she can roll up the canvas and take it with her.
The burning of Washington was a true disaster for the United States, at least at the moment. It's deeply embarrassing the United States to have its capital occupied and sacked and virtually destroyed, even in the primitive state in which our capital was.
With the president's house smoldering and Washington, D.C. in ruins, the nation was at a crossroads. But an unexpected victory at the Battle of Fort McHenry, the one that inspired the words for the national anthem, turned the tide.
The British realize, this war is not working for us. Both sides send diplomats to the Belgian city of Ghent, and in the winter of 1814, They negotiate a treaty that ends the war, that basically puts everything back the way it was when the war began.
The war was over. The country had paid a terrible price. More than 2,000 American soldiers were killed and another 6,000 injured. Despite the country's losses, American pride swelled.
The general verdict about the War of 1812 is that it gave birth to a new wave of nationalism in its immediate aftermath.
Before the War of 1812, people thought of themselves as Virginians, Marylanders, New Yorkers. They really didn't think of themselves the way we would talk as Americans. But after the war, there's this unbelievable surge of nationalism.
What might have been a disaster for President Madison and the nation became a rallying point.
When Madison left office in 1817, 2 years after the War of 1812 was over, he was actually quite a remarkably popular president. Americans understood the deeper point that Madison had been trying to make, that the presidency, even in wartime, was an office that should be conducted in a way consistent with Republican principles.
And that actually starts a whole era of prosperity and really ushers in the era of good feelings.
Okay, so we have the War of 1812, which, while it didn't do a lot for the United States, what it is going to do is it's going to bring about, instead of each state's feeling like they're their own country in a way, they're going to bring everybody together into this union of the United States. Okay, so that's probably one of the biggest effects that it has. The Treaty of Ghent ends the war, and it just takes things back to the status quo antebellum. And antebellum means before the war. So the status quo before the War of 1812. So it went back to how everything was before that war. All right, so one important battle was the Battle of New Orleans. Andrew Jackson is going to be a militia general from Tennessee. He is going to wind up defending New Orleans against the troops who had defeated Napoleon. The British incompetence produces a huge U.S. victory in the Battle of New Orleans. And it's significant because this is really the only significance. This was a bright, sunny spot in a war that ultimately didn't really do a lot. And it also made Andrew Jackson a national hero. And Andrew Jackson will ride that national hero status all the way to the presidency in future years. And again, it made the country more unified. So results of the War of 1812, the Federalist Party is going to completely collapse. The Federalist Party had opposed the war because it had hurt New England trade, and people were really upset that members of a major political party were not supporting the country. The Hartford Convention in 1814, and then, like the woman on the video said, it enters the United States into what is known as the era of good feelings. People are more united. There's a lack of decisiveness in politics. So people are respectful of one another. Like I said, the Federalists disappearing, the Democratic Republicans are kind of ascending up. And there's huge nationalism, having pride in your country. A lot of people viewed the War of Independence or the War of 1812 as the second War of Independence, and that we had to beat the British again, or at least had to keep things how they were. The Native American threat is going to kind of recede and go away. The U.S. enters its century of security and free trade. And the Monroe Doctrine in 1823 will be passed. And it basically was an attempt to make sure that Europe would not intervene in the Western Hemisphere, and that the United States was going to control Western Hemisphere and what was happening. So again, 3 points of the Monroe Doctrine. No additional European colonization would happen in the Western Hemisphere. So basically, it was telling Europe, specifically England, to stay out of the United States and other parts of the Western Hemisphere. No monarchical systems in the Western Hemisphere, so no kings and queens, anything like that. But it said, okay, you're not going to do these things, but we are not going to intervene in or interfere in European affairs or any existing colonies that you have. Okay, so it was a way for Europe and the United States to kind of tolerate one another, specifically England, at this time. Okay, so we've gone through Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and now Madison. The Monroe Doctrine will be issued under James Monroe, and we will pick up on Tuesday of next week. So everybody have a really great weekend. If you have questions, as always, you're welcome to text me or to email me, whatever you want. Don't forget to turn in your questions, and I will see you later. Have a great one.